The desert wind carried the scent of burning oil and dust as Lieutenant Sarah Martinez crouched behind the concrete barrier, her rifle steady in her hands. The abandoned chemical plant stretched before them like a concrete maze, its rusted pipes and broken windows creating perfect hiding spots for enemies. Intelligence reports had been clear. 12 American contractors were being held inside by a heavily armed militant group, and time was running out. Sarah had been the only female operator selected for this high-stakes rescue mission alongside 8 Navy SEALs from Team 6. Her sniper skills and tactical expertise had earned her respect in the special operations community, but she knew some of the men still questioned whether a woman belonged on such a dangerous assignment. Tonight would either prove her worth or end her career in the worst possible way. Team leader Commander Jake Thompson raised his fist, signaling the team to halt. Through her night vision goggles, Sarah could see the industrial complex sprawling ahead of them. 3 main buildings connected by a network of pipes and walkways with guard towers positioned at each corner. The militants had chosen their location well. Multiple escape routes, elevated positions for spotters, and enough structural complexity to make any assault extremely difficult. The mission briefing had been straightforward. Satellite imagery showed approximately 30 hostile fighters controlling the facility. The hostages were believed to be held in the central building's basement level. The team would split into 3 groups. Alpha Team would create a diversion at the main entrance. Bravo Team would breach from the east side, and Charlie Team would secure the extraction route. Sarah was assigned to Charlie Team with Petty Officers Mike Chen and Danny Rodriguez, 2 experienced SEALs who had worked together for years. Thompson's voice crackled through their communication system. The plan was simple in concept, but dangerous in execution. They had studied the facility layout for hours, memorizing every corridor, stairwell, and potential choke point. Sarah's role was to provide overwatch and precision fire support, while Chen and Rodriguez moved through the building, clearing rooms. Her Barrett .50 caliber sniper rifle was perfectly suited for penetrating the concrete walls and stopping any threats before they could harm the hostages. As they moved into position, Sarah noticed something that made her stomach tighten. The guard towers that should have been manned were empty, no movement in the windows where sentries should have been posted. Either the intelligence was wrong about the number of fighters, or this was about to become a trap. She keyed her radio to report the observation, but Thompson had already noticed the same thing. The compound felt too quiet as they approached their designated positions. Sarah found her overwatch spot on a water tower about 200 meters from the main building. The elevation gave her a clear view of the entire facility and excellent firing lanes to support her teammates. Through her scope, she could see heat signatures moving inside the buildings. The hostiles were definitely there, but their positions seemed random rather than defensive. Alpha Team began their approach to the main entrance right on schedule. Sarah watched through her scope as the first explosives detonated, blowing open the reinforced doors in a shower of concrete and metal. The sound echoed across the desert like thunder, and immediately the facility came alive with muzzle flashes and shouting voices. The diversion was working perfectly, drawing the militants toward the main breach point. Bravo Team moved swiftly toward their entry point on the east side of the complex. Sarah tracked their progress through her scope, ready to provide covering, fire if needed. Everything seemed to be going according to plan until she noticed something that made her blood run cold. The heat signatures inside the building weren't responding to Alpha Team's assault the way they should have been. Instead of rushing toward the gunfire, many of them were moving deeper into the structure. Her radio crackled with urgent communications. As the teams encountered heavier resistance than expected, the militants weren't panicking or making tactical mistakes. They were executing a well-planned defense using the facility's layout to channel the SEAL teams into predetermined kill zones. Sarah realized they had walked into a carefully prepared ambush. Through her scope, she watched as muzzle flashes erupted from windows throughout the complex. The distinctive sound of AK-47s mixed with the sharper crack of American M4 rifles as the firefight intensified. Alpha Team was pinned down near the main entrance, taking heavy fire from multiple directions. Bravo Team had breached their entry point but was encountering fierce resistance as they tried to advance toward the hostage location. Sarah's training took over as she began engaging targets through her scope. The .50 caliber rounds punched through concrete walls and metal barriers, with devastating effect. Each shot was carefully aimed to neutralize threats while avoiding any chance of hitting the hostages or her teammates. Her first target was a militant firing from a second-story window. The massive bullet shattered the window frame and eliminated the threat instantly. The situation deteriorated rapidly as more enemy fighters appeared from hidden positions throughout the facility. Intelligence had drastically underestimated their numbers and preparation level. Sarah continued providing precision fire support, but she could hear the strain in her teammates' voices over the radio. Ammunition was running low, and medical supplies were being consumed faster than planned. Commander Thompson's voice cut through the chaos with new orders. The mission parameters had changed. Instead of a coordinated assault, they would have to adapt to a running firefight while still attempting to reach the hostages. Sarah's position on the water tower made her the only team member with a clear view of the entire battlefield, making her tactical observations crucial for the team's survival. As she scanned the facility through her scope, Sarah spotted something that changed everything. A group of militants was moving the hostages from the basement to a vehicle near the back of the compound. If they succeeded in loading the prisoners into that truck, the rescue mission would become a pursuit across hostile territory with almost no chance of success. The contractors would disappear into the desert, probably never to be seen alive again. The weight of responsibility settled on Sarah's shoulders as she realized the mission's success now depended largely on her actions. Her teammates were heavily engaged and couldn't reposition quickly enough to intercept the hostage transfer. From her elevated position, she had the best chance of stopping the evacuation, but it would require leaving her overwatch post and moving closer to the action. The decision would determine whether 12 innocent people lived or died, and whether her team made it home safely. Sarah made the decision that would haunt her dreams for years to come. Abandoning her overwatch position, she rappelled down from the water tower with practiced efficiency, her gear secured tightly against her body. The sound of gunfire grew louder as she moved closer to the compound, each step taking her further from safety and deeper into the chaos of urban warfare. Her teammates' voices filled her earpiece with increasingly desperate situation reports. Alpha Team had suffered 2 casualties and was running dangerously low on ammunition. Bravo Team had managed to clear 2 buildings, but was pinned down by heavy machine gun fire from the 3rd structure. The carefully planned operation was falling apart, and Sarah knew that conventional tactics weren't going to save the day. Moving through the shadows between abandoned vehicles and concrete barriers, Sarah approached the rear of the compound where she had spotted the hostage movement. The militants were using a covered loading dock to transfer the prisoners, making it difficult for her to get a clear shot from her previous position. Now at ground level, she could see armed guards positioned around the area, their attention focused inward toward the ongoing firefight. The hostages were being loaded into 2 separate vehicles, a military-style truck and a smaller civilian van. Sarah could see through her scope that several of the contractors appeared injured, moving slowly and requiring assistance from their captors. Time was critical. Once those vehicles left the compound, tracking them through the desert would become nearly impossible, especially with her team under heavy fire and unable to pursue immediately. Sarah found a position behind a concrete mixer about 50 meters from the loading dock. Through her rifle scope, she could count 8 militants in the immediate area, plus the drivers of both vehicles. Her .50 caliber rifle gave her a significant advantage in terms of stopping power, but she would need to engage multiple targets quickly before they could react and potentially harm the hostages in retaliation. The first shot shattered the night air like a thunderclap. The militant commander directing the loading operation dropped instantly, his body crumpling between the 2 vehicles. Sarah immediately shifted her aim to the heavy machine gunner positioned on the truck bed, eliminating him before he could swing his weapon toward her position. The remaining fighters scrambled for cover, shouting orders in Arabic as they tried to locate the source of the devastating fire. Chaos erupted around the loading dock as Sarah continued her precision shooting. Each shot was calculated to neutralize threats while avoiding any chance of hitting the hostages, who were now caught in the crossfire. A militant who tried to use one of the contractors as a human shield found himself staring down the barrel of Sarah's rifle through a chain-link fence. The .50 caliber round punched through the metal barrier, and ended the threat without harming the civilian. The drivers of both vehicles attempted to escape with their remaining prisoners, but Sarah had anticipated this move. Her next shot disabled the truck's engine block, sending steam and oil spraying across the loading dock. The van driver managed to start his vehicle and began moving toward the exit, but Sarah's follow-up shot shattered the windshield and forced the vehicle to crash into a concrete barrier. With the immediate threat to the hostages neutralized, Sarah began receiving frantic radio calls from her teammates. The sound of her heavy rifle had drawn attention from militants throughout the compound, and they were now converging on her position from multiple directions. She could see muzzle flashes appearing in windows and doorways as enemy fighters attempted to pinpoint her location. Sarah's training kicked in as she transitioned from precision sniping to close-quarters combat. Slinging her rifle across her back, she drew her sidearm and began moving toward the hostages, using vehicles and concrete barriers for cover. The contractors were still zip-tied and unable to move freely, making them vulnerable to any militants who might decide to execute them rather than lose them to the rescue team. The first militant rounded the corner of the loading dock with his AK-47 raised, but Sarah was ready. 2 quick shots from her pistol dropped him before he could fire. She continued moving toward the hostages, her tactical awareness heightened by adrenaline and training. Every shadow could conceal an enemy. Every sound could indicate an approaching threat. As Sarah reached the crashed van, she found 3 contractors trapped inside with a militant who was trying to use them as shields while radioing for backup. The situation required split-second timing and perfect accuracy. Sarah waited for the fighter to move away from the civilians, then engaged him with a single precise shot that ended the standoff without harming the prisoners. The hostages looked at Sarah with a mixture of relief and disbelief. They had expected a large rescue team, not a single operator who seemed to be taking on an entire militant cell alone. Sarah quickly cut their restraints with her tactical knife while explaining that she was part of a larger team and that extraction was imminent. The lie was necessary to keep them calm and cooperative. More militants were approaching the loading dock area, their voices growing louder as they closed in on Sarah's position. She knew that trying to move 12 injured civilians through a firefight would be nearly impossible, especially with enemy fighters surrounding the area. The situation required a different approach, one that would draw the militants away from the hostages and give her teammates a chance to regroup. Sarah made another tactical decision that went against everything in the military handbook. Instead of waiting for backup or attempting to defend the loading dock, she would go on the offensive. By attacking the militants aggressively and forcing them to focus on her as a threat, she could potentially create an opening for her team to complete the extraction mission. She instructed the hostages to remain hidden among the vehicles and debris, promising them that help was coming. The contractors, all experienced workers who had been in dangerous situations before, understood the gravity of their situation and agreed to follow her instructions. Their survival depended on Sarah's ability to neutralize the remaining threats before enemy reinforcements could arrive. Moving away from the hostages, Sarah began stalking her next targets through the industrial maze of the compound. Her night vision equipment gave her a significant advantage in the darkness, allowing her to spot enemy positions before they could detect her presence. The militants were searching for her aggressively, but their lack of proper night vision equipment made them vulnerable to her superior training and equipment. The hunt was about to begin, and Sarah knew that the next few minutes would determine whether she would be remembered as a hero who saved 12 lives or as another casualty in an operation that went horribly wrong. The weight of responsibility pressed down on her shoulders, but her training and determination drove her forward into the darkness where death waited around every corner. The compound had become a deadly labyrinth where every shadow could hide an enemy, and every sound could mean the difference between life and death. Sarah moved through the industrial complex like a ghost, her black tactical gear blending perfectly with the darkness between the massive chemical processing equipment. The militants were hunting her now, but she had turned from prey into predator. Her earpiece crackled with updates from her teammates, but the news wasn't good. Alpha Team had taken another casualty and was trapped in a concrete bunker near the main entrance. Bravo Team was still pinned down by heavy machine gun fire and couldn't advance toward the hostage location. Commander Thompson's voice carried the strain of a leader watching his carefully planned mission fall apart in real time. Sarah knew that conventional military tactics weren't going to work in this situation. The militants had prepared for a standard rescue operation with multiple entry points and coordinated team movements. They hadn't prepared for a single operator who was willing to abandon the playbook and engage them on their own terms. It was time to use their expectations against them. Moving through a maze of chemical processing pipes, Sarah positioned herself near what appeared to be the militant command post. Through her night vision scope, she could see several fighters gathered around radio equipment, coordinating their response to the American assault. Taking out their communications would blind them and make coordination between different groups much more difficult. The first shot destroyed their primary radio in a shower of sparks and plastic fragments. Before the militants could react, Sarah had shifted position and eliminated the operator who was reaching for a backup communication device. Panic spread through the command post as the fighters realized they were under attack from an unknown position. Sarah continued moving through the facility, using her intimate knowledge of the layout to stay ahead of the search teams that were now desperately trying to locate her. Every few minutes, she would engage another target, then disappear back into the maze of industrial equipment. The psychological effect on the militants was becoming obvious. Their confident voices over captured radio frequencies were being replaced by nervous whispers and contradictory orders. The hunt intensified as Sarah worked her way toward the building where her teammates were pinned down. She could hear the distinctive sound of AK-47 fire, mixed with the heavier reports of machine guns. The militants had established several overlapping fields of fire that made it nearly impossible for the SEALs to advance or retreat safely. From her position in an elevated maintenance walkway, Sarah could see the machine gun nest that was causing the most problems for Bravo Team. 2 militants were operating a heavy weapon from a fortified position in a second-story window, with perfect lines of sight to the areas where the SEALs were trying to maneuver. The position was well protected from direct assault, but vulnerable to precision fire from an unexpected angle. Sarah's .50 caliber rifle roared again and the machine gun fell silent. The massive round had punched through the concrete wall around the window, eliminating both operators simultaneously. Immediately, she could hear Bravo Team beginning to advance, taking advantage of the sudden reduction in enemy fire. The tide of battle was beginning to shift, but Sarah knew she was far from finished. Moving deeper into the compound, Sarah encountered a group of 4 militants who were setting up an ambush position near one of the main corridors. They had positioned themselves perfectly to catch any rescue team trying to reach the original hostage location, unaware that the prisoners had already been moved. Sarah watched them through her scope, studying their positions and planning her approach. The engagement happened in seconds. Sarah's first shot eliminated the militant with the rocket-propelled grenade launcher, preventing him from using the devastating weapon against her teammates. Her second shot took out the fighter Manning, a light machine gun. The remaining 2 militants tried to retreat, but Sarah had anticipated their escape route. Moving through the shadows with deadly precision, she intercepted and neutralized both threats before they could warn other fighters about her presence. The compound's communication network was breaking down as Sarah continued her systematic destruction of enemy positions. Militant leaders were shouting contradictory orders over their radios, trying to coordinate a defense against an enemy they couldn't locate or understand. Some fighters were abandoning their positions and retreating toward the outer perimeter, while others were moving in random patterns that made them easy targets for Sarah's precision shooting. As Sarah approached the area where Alpha Team was trapped, she could see the tactical situation clearly. The SEALs were pinned down in a concrete structure with limited visibility and no safe routes for advancement or retreat. Several militants had positioned themselves in surrounding buildings with overlapping fields of fire, creating a deadly crossfire that prevented any movement. Sarah began engaging these positions one by one, using her elevation advantage and superior optics to pick off enemy fighters from distances where they couldn't effectively return fire. Each shot was carefully aimed to neutralize threats while avoiding any chance of hitting her teammates. The distinctive crack of her rifle became a beacon of hope for the trapped SEALs, who realized that someone was systematically eliminating the enemies that had them pinned down. The psychological warfare aspect of Sarah's tactics was becoming increasingly effective. The militants had expected to face a conventional military assault with predictable tactics and equipment. Instead, they were being hunted by what seemed like a supernatural enemy who could strike from any direction and disappear without a trace. Fear was spreading through their ranks faster than tactical communications. Commander Thompson's voice came through Sarah's earpiece with new orders. Intelligence intercepts suggested that enemy reinforcements were approaching the facility from multiple directions. The mission timeline had been compressed dramatically. They needed to complete the extraction within the next 30 minutes, or risk being overwhelmed by superior numbers. Sarah acknowledged the order and began moving toward the loading dock where she had left the hostages hidden among the vehicles and debris. She needed to ensure their safety and begin preparing for extraction. But first she had to clear the remaining militants from the area. Her ammunition supply was running low and every shot would need to count in the final phase of the operation. As she approached the loading dock area, Sarah could see movement among the shadows. Several militants had discovered the hostage location and were preparing to either execute the prisoners or use them as shields in a final desperate stand. The contractors were huddled together behind an overturned vehicle, their faces showing the terror of people who understood they were about to die. The final confrontation was about to begin, and Sarah knew that everything she had accomplished up to this point would be meaningless if she couldn't protect the people she had risked everything to save. The weight of 12 lives pressed down on her as she prepared for the most dangerous part of her mission. Close-quarters combat in a confined space where precision and speed would determine who lived and who died. The loading dock had become a maze of twisted metal and concrete debris, with the 12 hostages trapped in the center like pieces on a deadly chessboard. Sarah counted 5 militants moving through the wreckage, their weapons trained on the contractors who had no way to defend themselves. The situation required split-second timing and absolute precision. One mistake would result in multiple civilian deaths. Sarah positioned herself behind a concrete support pillar about 30 meters from the hostages, close enough for accurate pistol work but far enough to avoid being caught in crossfire. Through her night vision, she could see that the militants were arguing among themselves about what to do with the prisoners. Some wanted to use them as human shields to negotiate safe passage, while others seemed prepared to execute them rather than let them be rescued. The first militant made the decision for her. He raised his AK-47 toward the hostages with clear intent to fire, but Sarah's bullet found him first. The shot echoed through the loading dock like thunder, and immediately the remaining fighters scrambled for better positions while the contractors pressed themselves against the ground, trying to become invisible among the debris. Sarah moved quickly to a new position as return fire began chipping away at the concrete where she had been standing. The militants were shooting wildly, their muzzle flashes giving away their locations in the darkness. Sarah used their panic against them, engaging each target methodically while they wasted ammunition on shadows and empty spaces. The second fighter tried to use a shipping container for cover, but Sarah's superior positioning allowed her to engage him from an angle he hadn't anticipated. Her shot dropped him before he could adjust his aim toward her new location. The remaining 3 militants were now showing signs of real panic, their disciplined tactics breaking down as they realized they were being systematically eliminated by an enemy they couldn't see. One of the surviving fighters made a desperate decision that nearly ended the rescue mission. Instead of trying to locate Sarah, he grabbed one of the contractors and pressed his pistol to the man's head, shouting in broken English that he would kill the hostage unless the American shooter revealed herself. Sarah could see the terror in the civilian's eyes as the cold metal of the gun barrel pressed against his temple. The standoff lasted only seconds, but to Sarah it felt like hours. Every tactical manual said never to negotiate with terrorists, but looking at the frightened contractor who was about to die, she found herself considering options that went against everything she had been taught. The man was probably someone's father, husband, son, a civilian who had been in the wrong place at the wrong time and was now paying the price for geopolitical conflicts he didn't understand. Sarah's training took over as she spotted an opportunity. The militant holding the hostage was positioned near a large piece of chemical processing equipment with reflective metal surfaces. Using these improvised mirrors, Sarah could see his exact position without exposing herself to his line of fire. The shot would require threading the bullet through a narrow gap between two concrete barriers, but her marksmanship skills made it possible. The rifle shot came from an unexpected angle, and the hostage-taker crumpled without firing his weapon. The contractor stumbled away from his dead captor, shaking but unharmed. Sarah had eliminated another threat, but the sound of her shot had revealed her general position to the remaining militants, who immediately began concentrating their fire on her area. Moving through the loading dock required careful navigation around the debris and damaged vehicles while staying ahead of the search pattern the remaining militants were using to locate her. Sarah could hear them communicating in Arabic, trying to coordinate their movements to trap her in a crossfire. Their tactics were improving as their initial panic wore off, making them more dangerous opponents. The fourth militant almost succeeded in flanking Sarah's position. She spotted him just as he was raising his weapon to fire, forcing her to dive behind a concrete barrier as bullets sparked off the metal around her. The close call reminded her that these fighters were experienced combatants who were adapting to her tactics. She needed to end the engagement quickly before they could organize a more effective response. Sarah used a flashbang grenade to disorient the remaining militants, then moved aggressively through the confusion to engage them at close range. The first fighter was still recovering from the explosive when Sarah's pistol fire dropped him. The second militant tried to retreat toward better cover, but Sarah had anticipated his movement and positioned herself to cut off his escape route. The final confrontation happened at point-blank range between two overturned vehicles. Both fighters raised their weapons simultaneously, but Sarah's superior training and equipment gave her the critical advantage she needed. Her shot was true, and the last threat to the hostages was neutralized. Silence fell over the loading dock as Sarah conducted a quick security sweep to ensure no other militants were hidden among the debris. The 12 contractors looked at her with a mixture of gratitude and disbelief. They had watched a single operator eliminate multiple armed threats while protecting their lives, something that seemed impossible even though they had witnessed it firsthand. Sarah's earpiece crackled with updates from her teammates. Alpha Team had successfully fought their way out of the trap and was moving toward the extraction point. Bravo Team had cleared their assigned buildings and was providing security for the evacuation route. Commander Thompson's voice carried new urgency as he reported that enemy reinforcements were approaching the facility faster than anticipated. The extraction phase would require moving 12 injured civilians through potentially hostile territory to reach the helicopter landing zone. Sarah began organizing the contractors into groups based on their mobility and injuries, prioritizing those who could move independently while making arrangements for the others who would need assistance. As they prepared to leave the loading dock, Sarah's radio intercepted enemy communications indicating that a large militant force was approaching the facility from the north. The timing was critical. They needed to complete the extraction before the reinforcements arrived, or the entire rescue team could be trapped and overwhelmed by superior numbers. Sarah took point as they began moving toward the extraction site, with the contractors following in a tactical formation that provided maximum protection while allowing for rapid movement. Every shadow could conceal an enemy, and every sound could indicate an approaching threat. The successful rescue of the hostages was only meaningful if they could all make it safely to the helicopter. The desert night was filled with distant sounds of approaching vehicles and helicopter rotors, creating an audio landscape that made it difficult to distinguish between friendly and enemy forces. Sarah relied on her training and intuition to guide the group through the safest route while maintaining communication with her teammates, who were providing overwatch and security. The extraction point was still several hundred meters away when Sarah spotted the first signs of enemy reinforcements entering the facility. Vehicle headlights were sweeping across the compound, and the sound of diesel engines indicated that heavily armed technical vehicles were taking positions around the perimeter. The race against time had become even more urgent, and Sarah knew that their window for safe extraction was closing rapidly. The sound of helicopter rotors filled the night air as Sarah led the group of contractors through the maze of industrial equipment toward the extraction point. Behind them, the compound was coming alive with enemy activity, as reinforcements poured in from multiple directions. Vehicle-mounted searchlights swept across the facility, creating moving shadows that could either conceal or expose their position, depending on timing and luck. Sarah's earpiece buzzed with urgent communications from the extraction team. The helicopter. Pilots reported heavy anti-aircraft fire from the approaching militant reinforcements, forcing them to maintain a higher altitude that would make the pickup more complicated and dangerous. Every minute of delay increased the risk that enemy forces would surround the extraction site and trap the entire rescue team. Moving through the darkness with 12 injured civilians was like trying to conduct a symphony orchestra while under enemy fire. Sarah had to coordinate the movement of people with varying levels of mobility and injury, while maintaining security and navigation toward a constantly changing objective. Some contractors could move independently, while others required assistance that slowed the entire group. The first sign of serious trouble came when searchlights from enemy vehicles began sweeping the area around the extraction point. Sarah could see through her night vision that militant fighters were establishing positions that would give them overlapping fields of fire across the helicopter landing zone. The extraction was about to become a running firefight with innocent civilians caught in the crossfire. Commander Thompson's voice cut through the radio chatter with new tactical information. Satellite imagery showed at least 40 enemy fighters moving toward their position from 3 different directions. The original plan for a quiet extraction was no longer viable. They would need to fight their way out or risk being overwhelmed by superior numbers. Sarah made another tactical decision that went against standard operating procedures. Instead of waiting for her teammates to clear the landing zone, she would take the initiative and begin engaging the enemy positions herself. The contractors would be safer moving under the cover of active engagement rather than trying to hide and hoping the militants didn't discover their location. Positioning the hostages behind a concrete barrier that offered protection from multiple directions, Sarah began engaging the enemy searchlight positions. Her first shots took out 2 vehicle-mounted lights, plunging sections of the compound back into darkness that favored her night vision equipment. The militants began returning fire, but their shots were wild and uncoordinated without proper target identification. The battle for the extraction point intensified as Sarah continued eliminating threats while her teammates maneuvered into supporting positions. Alpha Team had reached an elevated position that allowed them to provide covering fire, while Bravo Team was moving to flank the main enemy concentration. The coordination between team members was seamless despite the chaos and complexity of the tactical situation. Sarah's ammunition supply was running critically low as she engaged target after target. Each shot had to count, not just for tactical effectiveness, but because she might not have enough rounds to continue the fight much longer. Her spare magazines were nearly empty, and resupply wasn't possible until they reached the extraction helicopter. The contractors huddled behind their protective barrier as bullets sparked off concrete and metal around them. Several of the civilians were showing signs of shock and exhaustion, but they followed Sarah's instructions without question. They understood that their survival depended entirely on the skill and determination of the operators who were fighting to get them home safely. Enemy reinforcements continued pouring into the compound, their headlights creating a deadly light show as they maneuvered for better firing positions. Sarah could see technical vehicles mounting heavy machine guns and rocket-propelled grenade launchers, weapons that could overwhelm even the best-trained special operations team if the militants managed to coordinate their employment effectively. The helicopter pilots reported that they were taking increasing amounts of ground fire as they attempted to approach the landing zone. One aircraft had already been hit by small arms fire and was leaking hydraulic fluid, forcing the crew to maintain a safer distance that would complicate the extraction process. Time was running out, and options were becoming increasingly limited. Sarah's radio crackled with emergency communications from Commander Thompson. Intelligence intercepts indicated that the militant leaders were planning to use mortar fire to target the extraction site. If they succeeded in ranging their weapons on the landing zone, the helicopter would be forced to abort the mission entirely, leaving the rescue team stranded in hostile territory with no means of escape. The tactical situation required immediate action to prevent the mortar attack. Sarah could see muzzle flashes from what appeared to be the enemy command position about 300 meters from the extraction site. If she could eliminate the leaders coordinating the attack, the remaining fighters might lose their organizational effectiveness and create an opening for successful extraction. Leaving the contractors under the protection of her teammates, Sarah began moving toward the enemy command post through terrain that offered minimal cover and concealment. Every meter of advance brought her closer to detection and death, but the alternative was watching helplessly as mortar rounds destroyed any chance of getting the hostages home alive. The approach required crawling through areas where enemy searchlights were sweeping continuously, timing her movement to stay in the shadows while making steady progress toward her objective. Sarah's tactical gear was designed for stealth operations, but at close range even the most advanced equipment couldn't guarantee invisibility against determined enemies with adequate numbers and positioning. Sarah reached a position where she could observe the enemy command post through her rifle scope. She could see several militant leaders gathered around radio equipment and what appeared to be a map of the facility. Their body language suggested they were finalizing plans for a coordinated assault on the extraction site, making them high-priority targets that needed to be eliminated immediately. The first shot eliminated the apparent senior leader, a man in military-style clothing, who had been pointing at locations on the map while giving orders. The second shot destroyed their primary radio equipment, cutting communications between the command post and the various fighting positions throughout the compound. Panic spread through the remaining militants as their carefully coordinated attack began falling apart. Sarah's position was now compromised as enemy fighters began searching for the sniper who had just destroyed their command structure. She needed to withdraw quickly while continuing to disrupt their tactical organization, but the route back to the extraction site was now covered by multiple enemy positions that hadn't been there during her approach. The sound of helicopter rotors grew louder as the extraction aircraft made another attempt to reach the landing zone, but ground fire immediately intensified as the militants tried to drive them away. Sarah could see tracer rounds arcing through the sky toward the helicopters, creating deadly fireworks that illuminated the entire battlefield. The pilots were taking enormous risks to complete the rescue mission, but they couldn't maintain position under such heavy fire indefinitely. Sarah began her fighting withdrawal toward the extraction site, engaging targets of opportunity while staying ahead of the search teams that were now actively hunting her. Every step brought her closer to safety and the contractors who were depending on her leadership, but also deeper into a tactical situation that was rapidly becoming untenable for everyone involved in the mission. The extraction site had become a killing field illuminated by burning vehicles and the constant muzzle flashes of automatic weapons. Sarah sprinted through the chaos with her last magazine loaded, knowing that every round would need to find its target if any of them were going to survive the next few minutes. The contractors were pressed against their concrete barrier as bullets whined overhead, their faces showing the resignation of people who had accepted they might not see another sunrise. Commander Thompson's voice cut through her earpiece with the words she had been dreading. The helicopter pilots reported that ground fire had become too intense for a safe landing. They would have to abort the extraction unless the team could suppress the enemy positions within the next 5 minutes. After that, fuel limitations would force them to return to base, leaving the rescue team stranded in hostile territory with no backup plan. Sarah reached the contractor position just as enemy mortars began falling around the extraction site. The first rounds were off target, but the militants were adjusting their aim with each salvo. She could see the mortar flashes in the distance, knowing that within minutes they would have the range perfected and the landing zone would become a crater field. The situation required a desperate gamble that violated every rule of tactical engagement. Sarah made the decision to use herself as bait to draw enemy fire away from the extraction site, while her teammates moved the contractors to a backup landing zone. It was a suicide mission disguised as a tactical maneuver, but it was the only option that gave the hostages a chance of survival. Sarah grabbed her remaining grenades and began moving toward the largest concentration of enemy fighters, her rifle, barking as she engaged targets at close range. The militants responded exactly as she had hoped, concentrating their fire on her position while losing track of the main group. Bullets sparked off concrete and metal around her as she dove between cover points, each movement calculated to maintain their attention while staying alive long enough to make a difference. The backup landing zone was a small clearing about 200 meters from the original site, partially protected by a ridgeline that would shield the helicopter from some of the ground fire. Alpha and Bravo teams began moving the contractors toward this position, while Sarah continued her one-woman assault on the enemy positions, creating enough chaos and confusion to mask the withdrawal. Her rifle clicked empty as she engaged the last target she could see through her scope. Sarah dropped the weapon and drew her sidearm, continuing to move through the industrial complex while enemy fighters pursued her with increasing desperation. They knew she was responsible for the systematic destruction of their defensive positions, and their desire for revenge was making them careless and predictable. The sound of helicopter rotors grew louder as the extraction aircraft approached the backup landing zone. Sarah could hear the distinctive whine of helicopter engines under stress as the pilots pushed their machines to maximum performance while taking ground fire. The crew chiefs would be manning their door guns, providing suppressing fire to keep enemy heads down during the critical loading phase. Sarah's earpiece crackled with updates from the extraction site. The first group of contractors was being loaded onto the helicopter while her teammates provided security. The process was taking longer than planned because several of the civilians were injured and required assistance to board the aircraft. Every second of delay increased the risk that enemy mortar fire would find the new landing zone. Running low on ammunition and options, Sarah made her final tactical decision of the mission. She would use her remaining grenades to destroy the enemy mortar position, even though it meant moving through open terrain that offered no cover from the dozens of fighters who were now hunting her. The mortars represented the greatest threat to the extraction helicopter, and eliminating them was worth the personal risk. The approach to the mortar position required crossing 100 meters of open ground, while under observation from multiple enemy positions. Sarah used smoke grenades to create concealment, then sprinted through the artificial fog while bullets whistled around her. The militants were firing blindly into the smoke, their shots guided more by desperation than tactical precision. Sarah reached the mortar position just as the crew was preparing to fire another salvo at the extraction site. Her grenades detonated among the weapons and ammunition, creating a secondary explosion that lit up the entire area and eliminated the indirect fire threat permanently. The blast knocked her unconscious and left her bleeding from multiple fragments, but the mission objective had been accomplished. When Sarah regained consciousness, she found herself being carried toward the helicopter by Commander Thompson and Petty Officer Chen. The extraction was nearly complete, with most of the contractors already loaded and the helicopter engines spooling up for immediate departure. The enemy fire had diminished significantly as militant fighters began withdrawing from positions that were no longer tenable. The helicopter lifted off in a shower of dirt and debris as the last SEAL team members jumped aboard. Sarah watched through the open door as the chemical plant grew smaller below them, the fires from burning vehicles creating orange dots in the darkness. All 12 contractors were alive and heading home, along with every member of the rescue team. The mission had been successful despite the complete breakdown of the original tactical plan. During the flight back to base, Sarah learned that her actions had eliminated exactly 12 enemy fighters in addition to destroying their command structure and heavy weapons positions. The number seemed fitting given the 12 lives she had been fighting to save. The contractors expressed their gratitude quietly, understanding that words were inadequate for what had just happened. The debrief would take hours as intelligence analysts tried to understand how a single operator had managed to accomplish what should have required an entire platoon. Sarah's after-action report would become required reading at special operations schools, though the classified nature of the mission meant that her name would never appear in public accounts of the rescue. Months later, Sarah received a medal in a classified ceremony attended only by senior military officials and the families of the rescued contractors. The citation simply stated that she had distinguished herself through exceptional valor in combat operations, but everyone in that room understood the true significance of what had happened in the desert that night. The 12 contractors returned to their families and eventually back to their work in dangerous places around the world. They carried with them the knowledge that sometimes when everything goes wrong and death seems certain, One person with the right training and determination can change the outcome of history. Sarah Martinez had proven that heroes aren't born from perfect plans and overwhelming firepower, but from the decision to keep fighting when surrender seems like the only rational choice.